Well, hello and welcome to everyone joining us for this X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Navigating the Landscape of Complex and Adaptive Oncology Trials, Key Challenges and Solutions. My name is Corey Stanton and I'll be your X-Talks host for this event. Today's presentation runs for approximately 60 minutes, and the webinar includes an interactive Q&A session with our speakers. To make the most of this session, please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to as many as possible. At this point, I'd like to thank Worldwide Clinical Trials who developed the content for this presentation. Worldwide Clinical Trials is a leading global contract research organization that works in partnership with biotechnology and pharmaceutical companies to create customized solutions that advance new medications from discovery to reality. Their full-service clinical development capabilities include bioanalytical laboratory services in phase 1 through 4 clinical trials, as well as post-approval and real-world evidence studies, all powered by their talented and accessible team of more than 3,500 professionals spanning over 60 countries. Everyone at Worldwide is united in cause with their customers to improve the lives of patients through new, innovative therapies. And one of our speakers today is Matt Cooper. Matt has 25 years of experience in life science industry conducting clinical trials across all phases. His experience spans roles at sponsors, sites, and the NHS, and he has extensive experience in site management and expanded use of oncology therapies. He is passionate about building effective relationships between industry stakeholders to drive innovation and patient access. And joining Matt today is Jim Ema. Jim's experience in scientific and clinical research spans more than 2 decades and includes work in academic, clinical, and CRO settings. Although oncology is his primary area of focus, he has also worked on clinical trials in other therapeutic areas. His intimate knowledge of studies at the level of the investigative site gives him the logistical and practical perspective needed for effective leadership and oversight. And now, without any further ado, I'd like to hand the mic over to our speakers, Matt and Jim. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and hello everybody, and welcome to this Worldwide Clinical Trials webinar. Jim and I are really pleased to be able to host this today, and over the next sort of 45 minutes or so, we hope to engage you on some of the challenges and solutions around complex and adaptive clinical trial designs. The structure of sessions set out on the slide here. Really, we're going to touch upon some of the FDA's projects, particularly around Project Optimus, talk around study designs and some of the designs that we've seen coming through to Worldwide, and then we'll finish up on some considerations around the Bayesian models and designs for clinical trials. So, Jim, over to you to talk about the FDA Center of Excellence.
Sure. If we go to the next slide, thank you very much. So, welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, based upon where you are. So just want to talk to you guys real briefly about some of the projects that FDA has going on. Over there in late phase, you can see we have Project Pragmatica, which is a project or initiative that I really like. Project Pragmatica, for those who don't know, it's actually bringing real-world standard of care practice into the research setting. So I don't know how many of you have worked in the site setting, or you've been a study coordinator, or you've been a principal investigator in the past, but I think we've all experienced those protocols that have come to us, and we look at them and we say, man, this is fantastic in theory, but this is never going to work in the clinic. We're never going to be able to do this, right? So this is something that we're just not going to be able to enroll to, or this is something that's just going to be so difficult on the patient. This is just something that we can't do. So that's something that the FDA is trying to do, which I really appreciate, and I especially like it from the ease of the patient burden perspective, because that's something that the FDA is focused on when it comes to Project Pragmatica. Project Orbis, in case you didn't know about that, Project Orbis is a very cool initiative or project that they're working on in terms of trying to bring drugs that are in clinical research that show significant efficacy, trying to get that to countries or patients around the world in which that clinical trial is not running. So I think that's a great initiative that they're doing. So if there's a drug really there that is showing promise, or a device that's showing promise, how can we get that to other countries and other sites and patients in the world who need it? So that's a great one as well. And then one last one before I pass it over to Matt is I think we've all heard about Project Equity. So this is, diversity in clinical research, and this is, depending on the conference, well, not really depending on the conference, but in every single conference that I go to, this is a hot topic as well, is diversity. So, now in phase 2B and phase 3 trials, and you have to have a diversity action plan. Those trials, you have to have one. You have to have a plan written out. We actually here at Worldwide, we have our own diversity team, our own diversity director who supports us in implementing diversity in our trials and our studies, helping sponsors to develop that diversity action plan. And one thing that a lot of people don't know is that yes, you have to have your diversity action plan, but you also have to have a diversity implementation plan as well. So we call it the DIP and the DAP. Okay, so once you have your diversity action plan, you have to have an implementation plan as well, for your study, which is now required. Okay, so those are, again, just some of the projects that are going on. Of course, you can look up Project Significant and Breakthrough and things like that. I think it's some nice reading. But Matt, I'm going to hand it over to you because today we're here to talk to you guys about Project Optimus. Okay.
Yeah.
So Matt,
I think we can have our first poll as well, aren't we, to see how familiar we are with Project Optimus. So we've got the questions coming up on the screen there.
So we've got an overwhelming majority here, 67% saying this is all new to me, but we do have 19% somewhat familiar and 14% very familiar. So almost a 2/3 split. I'll throw it back to you, Matt and Jim.
That was good to see. So we're A, everyone's awake, which is a good start, and B, we're we're talking to an audience that's engaged and need to know a little bit more about Project Optimus. That's super. So the Project Optimus is initiative by the FDA's Oncology Center of Excellence, and they're looking to look at how they can sort of reform the dose optimization and dose selection process for the oncology drug development. The aim is to try and look at going forward with a dose finding optimization model that is going to be really good at emphasizing the selection of the dose and maximizing the efficacy of the drug as well as its safety and the tolerability profiles. And we're seeing more and more now that the FDA are actively recommending to our sponsors when they're going in for discussions with the FDA around their phase 1 trial designs that they are implementing their Project Optimus designs, and I guess when the FDA recommend things, we sort of need to stand up and listen to that. So on the next slide, we'll go into a bit more detail about Project Optimus, and really this all stems from the fact that the phase 1 studies traditionally were set up in the phase of chemotherapy, in the era of chemotherapy, and chemo is a very, as we know, is a very blunt instrument, and it affects the fast dividing cells, but obviously it doesn't distinguish between cancerous cells and non-cancerous cells so well. So there was a linear relationship there between the dose of the drug you were given and its efficacy, but also between the dose that you were giving and its toxicity. So the original trials were set up in a sort of a more is better approach, and it was to see how much drug you could give to a patient before the toxicity became too great. We're now in an era of much more modern treatments that are much more targeted, and so there's no longer that sort of linear relationship between the dose of the drug and that sort of the toxicity profile. They have lots less off target toxicity compared to the chemotherapy. So the trial structure really needs to change now. So giving more doesn't actually mean you're always going to get a corresponding increase in the efficacy of the drug, but also it could still mean that you're getting toxicity though. So what we're wanting to look at is patients who are receiving treatments now could also be taking these drugs for a lot longer than they would traditionally take chemotherapies. So you could be on an antibody treatment for many months, if not years. So we're not just looking at the really high level toxicities, we're also looking at sort of the chronic long-term toxicities that can build up over time and be a real important impact on patients' lives, and be a reason for patients not continuing to take drug at its current levels, or missing doses, or maybe stopping altogether, and obviously that's not great. We've also seen that in phase 3 studies where the doses were initially, the doses of the drug were initially set at phase 1, nearly half of those patients in those trials have been having dose modifications because the dose just wasn't right for them. So the aim of Optimus is to bring dose finding into these earlier stages of oncology drug development, and really the idea is that at a minimum they would be looking at comparing the minimum biologically active dose using sort of PK and PD samples really against the highest tolerated dose, and preferably that would be in a randomized controlled trial as well. And we're really seeing now that this is being pushed very strongly through the FDA, and our sponsors are receiving that feedback during discussions. So yeah, it's becoming a really important piece of work to look at. So if we go on to the next slide. So this slide really shows a bit about the sort of feedback that we've been seeing from the FDA back to our sponsors around dose finding trials needing to look at conducting further dose exploration, looking at multiple doses, looking to see how we can get a better idea of taking several doses through into the next phase of the clinical development. And really, the states we don't want to see is that statement at the bottom with saying inadequately justified dosage could result in a clinical hold if sufficient information at the proposed dosages is not available to assess the risks to patients in clinical trials. And again, I can't really emphasize this more strongly enough that this isn't something that's going to go away. The path of phase 1 development is changing, and the FDA are really requesting this type of approach to their design in trials. So we really do need to look at that dose and the exposure responses and the relationships early on in the clinical trials process. With that, we'll go on to the next slide, next poll, actually, please.
Yes, that's right. We do have another interactive poll question for our audience. It's our second of 3 today. This time, the question we have for you is, how many of you have had studies impacted by Project Optimus? So even if you weren't necessarily familiar with it before, this is in essence FDA feedback resulting in design changes. And your options are A, yes, significant impact, B, yes, minor impact, or not so far. So in answer to this question, in terms of studies impacted by Project Optimus, we have 23% at significant impact, 16% at a minor impact, and 61% at not so far. So again, kind of that 2/3, 1/3 split. Matt and Jim, I'll send it back to you.
All right, we can go to the next slide. So what's been the impact on design? This is what we're starting to see more and more. All right, so this is just a sample of an actual design. You see I've de-identified some things here, but you can see now really we have in a phase 1 dose escalation expansion, really we're seeing more and more design where we have these 3 segments. You see over here on the left, you have the dose exploration or escalation, in which you have your multiple dose levels. We see designs, whether it's 3+3 designs, or it's a BOIN design, or what have you, or a type of Bayesian. And then what we're doing is that we're backfilling patients into those dose levels, and then we're identifying 2 dose levels that we want to explore further. So that way you see right there in the middle, you see the dose OPT, or the dose optimization segment of the design, in which 2 specific doses are being pulled out from escalation. More patients are being enrolled, more data is being collected, safety data, efficacy data, PK data, PD data, so on and so forth. And then ultimately a decision is made between those 2 doses, which is, just as Matt said, what is the most biologically optimal dose? Then we move into expansion. So again, the days of the standard 3+3 design, we're going to enroll 12 to 18 patients. We're going to identify an MTD or MAD, and then we're just boom, go straight to expansion. Those days are really going by the wayside. So this is more and more what we're seeing with designs. Now, I primarily, as Corey said, I primarily sit in oncology. So past 15 to 20 years, I've been sitting in oncology, so that's the perspective that I'm giving. But I would probably say, you know, at least 8 out of 10 protocols that I see nowadays all are having this dose optimization segment that's being implemented. So again, you know, we can, you know, meet the requirements or the recommendations of the FDA. So how is this impacting everybody, right? You know, how is this impacting you? And, you know, me and Matt going to talk to you a little bit about, you know, our thoughts in terms of, you know, how we can deal with this operationally, all right? And some of the solutions and thoughts that we have to making things go smoother and still keeping things efficient and still, you know, doing our best to try to hit timelines or bring our timelines in as best as we can, okay? So as you can imagine, as I just stated, it's no longer enrolling 12 to 18 patients, identifying the MTD, and then just moving on. So now we have to enroll more patients. Now we're having to backfill patients. You know, now we're, you know, I see protocols in which we're, you know, backfilling up to 40 patients, up to 48 patients, and so on and so forth, right? So there's a big time impact in dose escalation now. And of course, time equals money. All right, budgets are a little bit bigger, or maybe in some cases a lot bigger for dose escalation now. All right, so what's some things that we can do to try to either bring in those timelines or accelerate those timelines, okay? So one thing that I'm going to focus on here is site selection now, and PI selection has become more and more critical. That we, in the dose escalation or when you're starting a study, we really got to make sure that we select the right sites. And the one thing that I like to emphasize, especially the sponsors as well, it's not just about selecting the sites, but it's also about selecting the right PI. Selecting the right PI is so critical, all right? Because you might go to, we all know MD Anderson. Anderson, great, see a huge volume of patients, right? However, if you don't have the right PI, a PI that is engaged and enthusiastic about your clinical study, of course, that's going to impact your study, it's going to impact your enrollment, it's going to impact your timelines, okay? I think that we've all heard about the 80-20 rule, all right? So 80-20 rule is where 20% of your sites do 80% of your work, okay? And this was kind of something that was accepted really in the past, 10, 15 years. This is something nowadays we just got to completely have to avoid, all right? You really need 80% or 100%, preferably or preferably 100% of your sites. Everybody's engaged. Everybody's hitting your enrollment targets. So one thing that I've been doing to encourage that, to help sponsors really identify the right sites and the right PIs, is early engagement. I think that is now more and more critical, is that early engagement. So even before you select your CRO, is get out there and start talking to sites, start identifying the key opinion leaders, start really drumming up that excitement and engagement. And I think you all probably understand that you've used this word before, but really start trying to create some momentum for your study. And again, it's even before you select your CRO. I've seen so many times here, probably in the past 8 months to a year, where now we have this Project Optimus. It's getting bigger. It's having more of an impact on clinical research. And I talk to sponsors and say, have you done any site feasibility yet? Have you spoken to any sites? And they say, no, haven't spoken to anybody. All right. And I will tell you firsthand is that those studies start off slower versus the clients who I speak to when they say, yep, you know what, we've already identified 5 sites. We have a good relationship with these KOLs. We've been speaking to them for the past 4 or 5 months. They're engaged. They're ready to rock and roll. And man, those trials start so well. They start with such great momentum. And I wish I had some data, or maybe something, quantifiable to show you in terms of how that's impacted timelines. But I can just tell you, I guess subjectively, there's just been such a difference between sponsors who don't have any conversation or pre-engagement with sites versus those who do. The difference really is night and day. So that's something that I would highly recommend. The next thing is I want to talk to you guys about is the utilization of satellite sites. All right. So this was a strategy many years ago, really, that was just dismissed very quickly. And I am highly encouraging everybody to take a step back and think about this again and not dismiss it so quickly. So there was 3 reasons why people dismiss satellite sites. Okay, one was the big question: how's the PI going to do oversight? If there's multiple satellite sites, how's the PI going to do oversight? Okay, that was a big hurdle to overcome. The next one was pharmacy. So how is the IP going to be distributed? Do they have processes around that? You know, there was concerns about how that was going to be done. Then the third big thing was monitoring. Well, how are we going to monitor at all of these sites? Okay, and that really could be a whole other presentation that we can carve out. But the one thing I wanted to tell you is that over the years, sites, more and more sites, have put in solutions to those hurdles. Okay, one thing that sites are charged with nowadays, especially the research programs, is that they are charged with turning a profit. Okay, so 25 years ago, a site, their operating budget would their budget would be utilized from the hospital's budget, this, that, and the other. And research was just kind of, okay, you know, we're going to have a loss here, this, that, and the other. We're going to have a financial loss. Nowadays, that's different. And if anybody has been at a site or been a PI at a site or been, you know, in management of a site, they know that the research programs, they're expected to bring in a profit. They're expected to drive revenue now. And so sites have gotten more and more creative in terms of, okay, we have these different satellite locations. How can we get them more involved in research? What solutions can we put in place that really solve the PI oversight problem, the pharmacy problem, the monitoring issue? So especially like from an IP, a lot of places now have central pharmacies. They have excellent processes and technology in place for IP distribution to make sure that it's done efficiently, effectively, and according to rules and regulations. So, and they have similar things, you know, with monitoring as well in terms of central monitoring. And of course, technology has really improved that allows us more to use the satellite sites. And the reason why I bring this up, and I urge you guys just to reconsider it, it's not always going to be a perfect strategy or might not be a strategy you could use, but like I said, don't dismiss it so quickly, is because of Project Optimus and because we have to enroll more patients. Well, maybe this isn't the best expression, but what I'm encouraging everybody to do is that with the use of satellite sites, you can actually fish with a larger net. All right, and that is going to help you to identify more patients quicker, which can help you to stick to timelines or even accelerate your timelines or make sure that you don't experience any delays. Okay, so that's something that I definitely want to emphasize here. Matt, I know you had some thoughts about, you know, the relationships with the sites as well that you wanted to comment on. I know me and you talked about that.
I mean, I think, like you say, that the important things around picking those great sites, and the other thing is picking the sites that are happy to collaborate as well. Because I think as moving into the more complicated trial type designs where we're looking at different cohorts, recruiting from lots of different sites, it becomes really important for the sites to collaborate amongst themselves, particularly around slot allocations. And we don't want sites hanging on to a slot because they think a patient's probably going to come around. If another site's got a patient that's really in need of that treatment, that they can give that slot over. And it's really encouraging that team approach on a study, which perhaps hasn't always been the case here. We very much drive competition amongst sites usually to recruit the most, but sometimes actually a more collaborative approach is going to get the trial done in a better way and a better way for patients as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So another way in which we are selecting the very best sites and making sure that we're identifying, where these patients are, so that we can really maximize, our site inputs and our site enrollment, is that we're using technology, right? A lot of sponsors are, using technology. CROs are using technology and saying, hey, and there's more and more vendors that are popping up, patient recruitment, patient identification vendors that are popping up saying, hey, this is how we can best identify, or this is how we can identify the best sites and identify where these patients are, for your studies. So a couple of things that we use, or a few technology platforms that we use here at Worldwide, is we use Medidata AI, and we use global data. And we just provide you here a quick snapshot of Medidata AI. And as you can see in the frame over on the left, what we can do is that we can use real-time data from Medidata to be able to say, okay, what are the most successful countries, for this patient population or a subset of a patient population. So you can see here, you have a heat map, so we can identify, all right, these are the countries, especially for a larger trial, if this was a larger trial, these are the countries that we want to explore, or these are the countries that we should be identifying or putting into our country site mix in order to successfully execute on this study. And then on the frame on the right, you can see you're drilling down into the site level. So you can look at site X, Y, and Z. Obviously, we have de-identified it, but you can actually see the sites, and you can see exactly how many sites have enrolled X amount of patients over a certain amount of time. So that way you can see your top performing sites, for a specific indication. So this is the way we're doing it. And what's even more unique about this as well, you can even drill down further, because, and I love how Medidata did this, is that yes, enrollment is great, all right, and that's critical and it's important, but what is the data quality? So you can actually drill down in Medidata into that site's data quality as well, in terms of how well they've done there. Because as we all know, enrollment's great, but if we're not getting the data, or if there's questions about the data's integrity or what have you, well, that doesn't do you any good. So there's another element or another level that we can go to when we're identifying our sites. It's not just, if the data's there, just not about how they've enrolled or how many patients they've enrolled, but we can actually look at their data quality as well, which is critical. So this is just one platform that we use. We definitely use this platform a lot. There's others. So, but I encourage you guys, again, if you're, speaking to a CRO, or if you're going to be bringing your trials in-house, to leverage Medidata and other technology platforms, and again, to really identify your best countries and your best sites. Okay. Next slide. All right, and so I'm going to hand it over to Matt. I know that we're right at the half-hour mark, and so Matt's going to talk a little bit to you guys about some study design trends that we're seeing. So Matt.
Yeah, cheers, Jim. And I encourage the listeners, to keep sending questions through onto the chat as well, and we can look at those at the end. So yeah, so do you want to talk a little bit about some of the study design trends that we're seeing coming through? Yeah, we see a lot of trials coming in various shapes and sizes. On the next slide, there's a bit of a list of the smorgasbord of the types of studies that we've seen coming through here. So, we've got from the usual sort of 3+3 types of designs where, these are the traditional rules-based approach of 3 patients receiving the same dose. And, if one has a dose-limiting toxicity, then you put another 3 patients in at that same level again. And that's fine. That's a traditional way that trials have been run, but they're very simple to run, but they're not as efficient as the newer models coming through. And people have said that only around about just over a third of patients actually receive an optimal dose during the 3+3 trial design. Some of the other types of trials are around accelerated titration, which is another sort of rules-based approach, but this starts off at the lower cohorts by just adding just one or 2 patients in at the lower dose, and then moving them up more quickly. So you're subjecting fewer patients to these lower suboptimal doses. We get into acronym territory now with the MTPI trials. So these modified toxicity probability interval studies. So this is a Bayesian type of design, which uses obviously a statistical based approach to treat it's designed to treat fewer patients above the maximum tolerated dose level. Personally, I've seen fewer of this type of Bayesian approach. We'll talk about some of the other Bayesian style designs we've seen coming through. Randomization, obviously, vast majority of the studies we're looking at are going to be randomized trials. There's a big push from the FDA to move away from the single arm studies into randomized trials. It's important to know, I guess, in sort of the phase 1 setting, these randomized studies don't need to be huge studies that need to show superiority or inferiority. It just needs to be adequate enough to be able to show a relationship between the dose and the efficacy, and the dose and the toxicity effects of the drug that's being used. Obviously, endpoints, we see a whole different host of endpoints being used now, but particularly with the biomarkers, more and more studies are using biomarkers as endpoint assessments. And it's really been shown that trials that you're designing a trial with a good endpoint in place right from the off is going to have a much more successful outcome than studies that aren't, particularly around sort of the biomarker use. We're also seeing sort of PK and PD being brought in alongside those endpoints to give really good data outputs from those trials. Master protocols, so there's again a whole range of different types of master protocol designs, whether it's a basket type of trial where you're looking at a single drug across multiple different tumor types, or platform studies that we've seen. These have seemed to be becoming more popular, which I guess is a bit of a mix where there could be multiple arms looking at different drugs in different tumor combinations. And these, whilst they can be quite complicated to run, and I think you'd only be using these types of trials if you really have 3 or 4 different sort of arms that you want to run. But these types of trials, they can almost become semi-perpetual trials. There's a great example is the Stampede trial in prostate cancer that was set up by the MRC trials unit in London, and it ran for a number of years, and it had it was a multi-arm, multi-stage study where they had different drugs being used in with different biomarkers based in different arms of the trial, and it allowed them to stop certain arms if the data wasn't good, or if the profiles weren't great either from efficacy or toxicity. They also allowed them to bring additional arms in during the study process. The standard of care changed during the trial, but actually because of the platform design, they were able to build in the new type of standard of care and continue the trial on, and that was used to great effect. So we are seeing more platform type of trials coming through. And then we're seeing a whole host of different sort of flavors of Bayesian types of trials, and there are lots of different ones out there. I think we see these Bayesian optimal phase 2 trial designs, which is sort of a bit of a halfway house to the Bayesian approach, but they're also lookup tables to help them to be implemented more easily. And then I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about in detail about the Bayesian logistic regression model studies and the Bayesian optimal interval trial designs, but really they're all based on this Bayesian statistical approach, and I think whilst the designs have been around for a number of years now, maybe even like 10 years probably, some of these designs. It's only in more recent years that they've started to become more popular. I think partly because folk are a bit concerned about the statistical knowledge that's needed to implement them, and partly because people are perhaps confused about which is the best type of design to use and in their study protocols. So I think we'll go for our last poll, please, Corey, for the Bayesian designs.
Yes, that's right. This is our third and final interactive poll question. And as Matt was saying this time, the question we have for you is currently, how many of you are using a Bayesian design in your current study or in your studies? And we have 4 options for you. Number 1, yes, I am using it. No, I have not used it yet, but I'm thinking about it. Simply haven't used it, or Bayesian design intimidates me. So the percentages that have come in this time, we've got 27% saying, yes, I am using it. 7%, I have not used it yet, but I'm thinking about it. Our majority at 60% hasn't used it, and 7% of you were brave enough to admit that Bayesian design intimidates you. So I'll pass things back over to Matt and Jim.
Cheers. So I mean, hopefully we can help persuade folk that a Bayesian approach could be a good thing to implement in your design, and hopefully that it's not too intimidating. But I think on that intimidation point, I mean, there's an awful lot of literature out there now around implementation of the various different shapes and sizes of BOIN. But I think, you know, talking to teams that have used these models in the past will give you a good idea about the types to use. And I think, you know, dipping the toe in the water with perhaps some of the easier to operate designs might be a good way forward. So I think if we look at the I guess the 2 that we see the most probably is the logistical regression model or the optimal interval design. And I think if you look at the logistical regression model, it's a statistical design that looks at continuously updating the dose toxicity curve on the data coming out based on the data that's accumulated during the running of the trial, and it gives you good sort of safety rule profile to follow, and recommendations for the next levels. It is a slightly more complicated trial to implement, and does really require some statistical backup for it. However, it integrates both the PK and PD data into the safety data that it's collecting when it's looking at the cohort levels, and so it allows clinicians to make a really good informed decision on the dosages to implement during the trial. The feedback that it's been getting is that because of the way it's designed, it could be perhaps more conservative than certain Bayesian designs. So it could be a bit conservative when trying to identify the maximum tolerated dose. When you look at the BOIN type of trial, again, that's another Bayesian statistical model assisted approach. It's a simpler study design. You've got like a online computer program which anybody can use. You don't need to be a statistician to be able to use it. It uses predetermined tables to assist the decision making during the trial process, and they're sort of published upfront in the protocol. It's quite similar to the continuous reassessment method, but again, it's a simpler model to use and to implement in your studies. So I think whilst they've got sort of comparable performance levels, if you're going to be sort of dipping your toe in Bayesian waters for the first time, I think the BOIN type of trial would be the better trial to go for your
Matt,
first
I call it
phase ones.
I call it the BOIN, to your point, if you're dipping your waters in for the first time, I call it the Home Depot do-it-yourself of Bayesian. So that's what I tend to call it. But yeah, Matt's recommendation is good. If you are dipping your waters or dipping your toes into the water for the first time, BOIN is where you want to go.
Yeah, and I think there's a whole host of different BOIN designs, and I think actually attached to the information for this webinar is a white paper that and a sort of an infographic around the different types of Bayesian trial approach that you could use. But I think really the takeaway points for this is, that for simplicity's sake, but still with a really good outcome for both the trial, but also importantly for the patients going into it, is that BOIN the BOIN approach is going to be a really good successful model to implement, and it's going to give you a good data for your trial. So if we go on to the next slide, yeah, Jim.
Yeah, so just how do we make BOIN a success? Okay, so just a few bubbles and some few thoughts that me and Matt want to share with you before we close out the presentation. So one is early DLT identification, and I think we all know just how critical that is. So you got a lot of lines of defense in terms of identifying DLTs. Obviously, you have the medical monitors, you have either both at the CRO or the sponsor who are working together. You have the PIs at the sites, study coordinators, and then of course you have the CRAs. And that's one thing here at Worldwide, a little bit of a shameless plug, but at Worldwide is we actually put a ton of emphasis, especially in your dose escalation and expansion studies, in teaching our CRAs really to be able to identify the DLTs. Especially, there are some studies, there are some protocols who have some very unique or very idiosyncratic DLT criteria. So we really try to put a lot of emphasis and a lot of focus on the CRAs and making sure that when they're out there, because whether they're at the site and they're doing on-site monitoring, or they're looking at the EMR, when they're doing remote monitoring, but really being able to identify the DLTs or catch anything, because we don't want any setbacks or delays. The last thing that you want is for a DLT to have occurred, and unfortunately it kind of slips past our layers of defenses, and then all of a sudden we've gone on to the next dose level, when in fact we should have expanded per 3+3 design, or through a Bayesian design we should have again added more patients, whatever the algorithm tells you to do. So that early DLT identification is just super important, and with that Matt's going to talk just about increasing the frequency of the biweekly PI calls. So Matt, I'll hand it over.
So I think the other bit that goes hand in hand with this is, as you say, Jim, is that communication piece is really important. These study designs are really dynamic, and we really need to make sure that we're keeping on top of that communication with the sites, so they really understand what's happening every step of the way. They know what exactly is going to be happening next. They know what's being picked up from other sites around the safety profiles, what DLTs they might be seeing, or where there might be tricky calls. So I think that's massively important. We can't emphasize that enough, and particularly when it comes to the cohort plans and the dosing. Again, making sure that it's really open and transparent, so there isn't any misunderstandings about where the patients are coming from next, which sites are contributing to which element, which cohorts of the trial. Again, because this is a whole team, it takes a team to deliver these trials, both within the sponsor, the CRO, and the sites taking part in them. So everybody needs to be transparent and share all the information that they've got at the time to make this this trial a successful piece. And then going on from that is around in the cohort process itself is, whilst you're waiting for their last patient to finish out through that cohort and get through their last steps, is to keep proactively screening for those next patients to build up ready for the next cohort coming along. We don't want to have any dead time in our study, so we need to make sure that, again, proactively working with the sites to make sure they're still screening and getting patients lined up, and we've already got in the background a running order of where are the next patients going to be coming from, which sites have got them, where are they within their journey for that site, so that we've got a really good understanding of, as soon as that next cohort dosing level is set, the next 2, 3, 4 patients are going to be coming from sites X, Y, and Z, and that's all really upfront and clear right from the start, so we don't lose any time during that process.
The other thing here is that interest subject escalation. So this is something that BOIN allows you to do. So you can actually dose escalate a patient. So there's 3 things or 3 criteria that need to be met, okay? So your SRC or your DSMB has to approve the next highest dose, okay? The PI needs to feel that the patient could clinically benefit from getting the next highest dose. And the third criteria that has to be met is that the patient has to have at least 2 doses or 2 cycles of the drug at the previous dose level. Okay, so you can dose escalate. So again, just to clarify this, if there was a patient who got 100 milligrams and each cycle was, say, 2 weeks long, and they received 2 cycles of that drug, and perhaps they're still, they're obviously still on study, still doing well, and then the next cohort of 200 milligrams has also completed and been approved and deemed safe by the SRC or DSMB, you can go back to that patient and you can speak to that PI and say, hey, they've already gotten 2 cycles, 200 milligrams has been approved. Do you think that they could experience, additional clinical benefit, or even a greater clinical benefit if we were to dose escalate and increase their dose? And you can do that. And so essentially, it's kind of like a 2-for-1. If you're doing, you can do PKs all over again. So, if you did PKs on that patient at 100 milligrams, you can again do PKs again. It allows you to collect more data. It allows you, again, you have to, enroll one less patient, potentially. But that's something that BOIN allows you to do as well. So something that could create some efficiencies, again, to kind of help accelerate some of those timelines, so that you can, get your data, get more data, but you can get it in a more expedited manner. Okay. And of course, with that, when you're collecting all of that data, it just allows you to meet the requirements and the recommendations of Project Optimus, because eventually you're going to have to go to, and Matt, you correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's called a clinical pharmacology dose optimization meeting or something like that. So there's a meeting that you are going to have to go to, and you're going to have to present the FDA your data in terms of why this particular dose, or why this RP2D, how it's been justified, or how this dose has been justified as the RP2D. And you will need to have a substantial amount of data to be able to demonstrate that to the FDA and prove to them that, yep, this is not only not only efficacious, but it is a safe dosage that patients can take and take for a while, and not just take for 1 or 2 cycles, experience a significant amount of toxicity, and then have to go off study. And that really, at the heart of it, was one of the derivations of Project Optimus. Okay. So I see that we have 10 minutes left, Corey. That is it for me and Matt. So we will, we have the last 10 minutes for questions, and we can open it up.
Excellent. Thank you both very much for that insightful presentation. As Jim was saying, we're now ready to begin the Q&A portion of the event. And as we do so, I invite the audience to continue sending their questions or comments using the questions window chat box. It does look like we've already received some audience questions. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the first, but please feel free to send some as we continue to work through this Q&A session. This first question that's come in from the audience is asking, and I believe this can go to both of you, so whoever feels comfortable taking it, or you can riff on it a little bit together. How often exactly are you seeing optimization segments as part of the protocol design in recent months?
So I'll take that. And again, for the person who asked the question, just remember, I'm, for the past 15, 20 years, I just sit in oncology. So this is from an oncology perspective. I would say 7 or 8 out of 10 protocols now have an optimization segment. So it is very common. And if they don't have any type of optimization, so I sit, or I work directly with our clinical development and our scientific solutions group with Dr. Michael Murphy and Dr. Matt Confeld. And if they don't really have a dose optimization segment, we actually will encourage them to do so, or we kind of will probe into, well, why don't you have one? What is your thinking? Why is your rationale? And of course, there's certain different types of drugs or investigational products. For instance, CAR T. If you were to do a CAR T actually does not necessarily require that, or doesn't require that. If Dr. Confeld were here, he could talk about that. He can elaborate that or elaborate on that more. But so there are certain types of drugs that actually might not require it based on the mechanism of action, but there's a lot that do. So, but yeah, I would say the majority, and Matt, I'll stop talking here, but I would say the majority that I see have optimization built into the design? Matt?
You answered that one fine. Nothing to add to that.
Good deal.
No, that's great. Thanks for that, Jim. We can move on to another question in here that's come in from the audience. And I think you've touched upon this a little bit in the presentation, but we'll try to address this here. They're asking, what do you think is the biggest operational impact that Project Optimus has had on clinical research?
I'll start and you carry on, Jim. I think, obviously, probably the biggest impact is adding extra stress to teams. They worrying about how to look at implementing these types of trial designs into their programs, and of course the impacts on the budgets because of the additional scale and time that these trials are going to take. I think to balance into that is, whilst it might be higher upfront costs, what it's going to do is give you some great data, taking a really good dose through into the next stages of trials, and give your phase 2s and 3s a better chance at success, and also give patients a better chance at receiving a drug at a more optimal dose. So you'd hope that there would be savings in the long run over better, quicker running phase 2 and phase 3 studies.
Yeah, I would say one thing is that obviously there's a huge timeline impact. So one of the biggest questions that I get asked from clients is that, how can we amplify our enrollment rates? Okay, so I know a lot of you, you've done studies, and whether you're looking at non-small cell lung, you're looking at colorectal, or you're looking at TNBC and breast, or you're looking at a subset of a population, right? So maybe you're looking at DMMR, MSI-H, or MSI-high in colorectal. So we've all seen the data that's out there, and so you look at the feasibility data and you look over the past 10 years, similar trials, and of course you're trying to identify what is the enrollment rate that we're going to experience here. So, but one thing that we're trying to do is that, okay, well, this is typically what we see over the past 10 years, but how can we amplify that? Based on the requirements of Project Optimus now needing more patients, and it's going to take more time. So what can we do to amplify that enrollment rate and accelerate this, so that way we can save on time, which means that we're going to save on money. So, I mean, some of the things, of course, that we're doing, again, we're leveraging data. We're leveraging AI data, metadata, global data, other different types of platforms. Another thing that's, we're trying to do is, again, speak to more, investigators and really, drive some momentum there. One last thing, and then we can move on, is that, we're always here at Worldwide, we are always trying to identify different vendors that can really assist with finding exactly where these patients are. So we actually have a couple of great vendors that have come up with some very unique platforms, and being able to say, hey, they actually can reach out to the site and say, just want to let you know, you have a patient who's going to be coming in next week, and they have the exact phenotype that we need for this study. And based on looking at their medical records, they already qualify for this study. So just keep that in mind. So, and that really helps as well. So being able to pre-identify those patients in a much more meticulous way, of course, is definitely helping us to kind of accelerate or amplify those enrollment rates.
Great, excellent. Thank you for that. I think we have time to maybe get through a couple more questions here. This question that's coming from the audience that it's really interesting, actually, and I was thinking about it while you guys were giving a presentation. This audience member is asking, how is Project Optimus impacting the more smaller emerging biotechs? How do they fare when going up against Project Optimus?
Matt, you want to take that one, or do you want me to crack at it?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think the impacts of Optimus are going to be harder on the smaller companies, the biotechs, because they just don't have the same resources that the larger pharma do. So I think that's going to be the number one impact on that. But I think ways to mitigate that is to engage it early, bring in people that can help you make those designs. Again, a shameless plug is, I guess we can help do that from Worldwide's point of view, so you don't have to struggle alone to figure out how you're going to make this work. Work with other people, work with investigators. There's some really experienced investigators out there that have done these types of trials that could help work with the smaller biotech companies to help them look at that. I think when you're a small company and you've just got one product, life's difficult. We understand those challenges, and we can do everything we can to help you design the most effective, both in terms of operational but also cost trial to work your product through.
Great, excellent. I think we have time now just for one more question here. Apologies to any of our audience members whose questions we don't get to, but I'll have some information for you after we get through this last question here. This audience member was asking, saying, this is all well and good, it's great for the FDA, but what about the EU, right? Like how do the EU sponsors actually manage FDA dose optimization requirements?
Yeah, at the moment, whilst some of the FDA approach has been picked up in other areas, we're not seeing a Optimus-like project being driven out of the EU. There's different working groups been around, and there's discussions around better optimization of trials, but I don't think there's as yet the same push from the EMA for these types of studies as there is from the FDA. However, the challenge for our sponsor is when you're running a global trial and you're maybe based in the EU, but you're wanting to run studies in Europe and in the States, you're going to need to take that into account because you're still going to have to get your regulatory approval from the FDA. So it's going to impact on everybody running trials in the States, not just those sponsors that are based in the US.
Great, excellent. Thank you both so much for all those answers. At this point, we have reached the end of our Q&A session. To any of our audience members who sent in questions that if we couldn't attend to them, or if you have any further questions, or if you're someone who's watching the recording of this webinar, you can absolutely get in touch with the team at Worldwide using the contact info we have currently up on screen. There's email addresses there for Matt and for Jim, and they will have a chance to follow up with you after the webinar. I do thank everyone once again for participating today. Just at the moment, I'm going to go ahead and add a link to the chat box where you'll be able to access a recording of this event. It's usually available in a few business days, and you can share this link with your colleagues so that they may register to view it as well. You will also be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks that will provide access to today's recording. And as we wrap things up here, please note that a survey window will appear on screen. Your participation in the survey is always appreciated as it does help us to improve our webinars. Now, please join me once again in thanking our speakers once more for their excellent presentation. Matt and Jim, it was a pleasure. We really hope that our audience found it informative, and we wish you all a great rest of your day. Take care.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks a lot. Bye.